How can you leverage technology to create more value for your organization? How do you stay on top of the latest technology trends? Welcome to KPMG Digital Gateway, a single cloud-based platform solution where technology meets tax. Designed to make it easier than ever to access all your data and do your work in one place. Digital Gateway provides you access to the complete suite of KPMG tax technologies and a global network of KPMG tax professionals. Powered by Microsoft Azure and with KPMG's ambitious investments in AI, KPMG Digital Gateway won't just streamline the way you gather, manipulate, and review data. It can supercharge it, processing and transforming your data into actionable insights. Generating value from Digital Gateway is straightforward thanks to its intuitive interface and modular design, all built with connectivity in mind.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of KPMG Tax Chat. My name is Onyekachi Okechukwu, and I'm a manager in the Tax, Regulatory, and People Services Division of KPMG West Africa. Now, over the last couple of years, we've seen that there's been a significant transformation in the way work is being done globally. In terms of advances in technology, increased workforce mobility, there's also been a rise in hybrid and remote working arrangements. And generally, the need or the increased need for specialized skills has made it increasingly easier for businesses or for talent, to work across borders. But at the same time, we'll find that governments, and that of Nigeria inclusive, are beginning to pay much more attention to this trend, given the implications around tax and immigration. Now, as organizations continue to expand their operations across the world globally, you find that there's been an increased engagement with expatriates. There's also significant increase in international assignments and generally cross-border working arrangements. Now, these developments come with a lot of positives. Of course, there are a lot of positive things to gain from it. But at the same time, it also comes with very, very complex tax, payroll, immigration compliance obligations, both for the employees and the employers, based on the new work pattern. Now, in today's session, titled Borders, Taxes and Talents, Nigeria's New Work Reality, a Tax and Immigration Lens, we'll be looking at the intersection between the increased workforce mobility, like that I mentioned, immigration requirements, compliance and tax obligations for both individuals and employees, like we rightly mentioned. We'll also be looking at the key considerations for businesses that manage a mobile workforce. We'll talk about the very, very common compliance risks, and generally how employers and employees can manage this new world of work while remaining fully compliant with tax and immigration laws worldwide. We trust that the discussion, of course, will provide you valuable insights into what we're talking about, and then guidance for both individuals and companies alike, such that everybody can stay compliant and compute the right taxes and do everything the right way it should be done. We look forward to having a very, very engaging conversation, and thank you for joining us today. Now, in the session today, we have with me Bukumi Olaniyonu, who is an associate director in the Tax, Regulatory, and People Services Division of KPMG Nigeria. He will be answering your questions and then also providing insights into the topic in general. Welcome, Bukumi. We'll just at this point in time call on Bukumi to give us a general overview on the issues that we'll be discussing, which is once again borders, talents, and taxes, Nigeria's new work reality, a tax and migration lens. Bukumi, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Kachi. Good morning, everyone, or good day, everyone, because I believe that people may be joining us from various parts of the world, and it's important to recognize that. Thank you so much for making our time to be with us today. The topic for today is so relevant, and it's important that we really look closely at it in the age of compliance, in the age of technology, where a lot of organizations need to pay attention to the changes in that space. Countries all over the world, and Nigeria is not left out, is investing a lot of funds in technology, is investing a lot of attention to making sure that compliance is a key area of focus. And today, I'm so excited to be able to share my insights, and hopefully we can also learn from our audience as they share their insights. We participate in the poll questions. So I'm really looking forward to what we have to do today. Thank you so much, Kachi, and welcome again, everyone.
Thank you so much, Bukumi, for that, for setting the scene so clearly. It's very, very important that, our audience today understands what we're going to be discussing so that they could follow the conversation, and then we can have a very, very, very engaging conversation. Now, but before we go deep into the crux of the conversation that we'll be having today, we would like to also have a feel of the audience, their pulse, and, know what exactly is happening with them, and with some poll questions. So we'll be taking a poll shortly. For the audience, please click on the link in the chat box, or there will be a code now, a barcode that will be displayed on your screen shortly. You can scan that code to be able to access the poll. We'll be asking the questions, and you provide your answers how you think about it. Now, the purpose of the conversation today, like we said, is to provide more insight and throw more light to some of these conversations today. So in that sense, there's really no issues with filling the questions. The important thing is just to have a feel of how far you know of the tax issues, and then we'll provide clarifications on that front. Thank you very much. So we have some people already joining. That's good. We have about currently, yeah, we have people joining the poll, so that's good. So we will just go right ahead into it, and would encourage our participants our audience, to participate in the poll, so that it would help us, get the flow going. So the first question to the audience is, which of the following laws is generally regarded as a primary legislation for employment relationships in Nigeria? I'll take that once again. Which of the following laws are generally regarded as the primary legislation for employment relationships in Nigeria? As the first option, we have the Pensions Reform Act of 2014. The second option here we have is the Employees Compensation Act of 2010. Then as C, we have the Labor Act, Cap 1 L1, Law of the Federation of Nigeria of 2004. Then we have the National Funding Act. Would encourage you to start putting in your answers. Let's get this ball rolling. Oh, wow. Okay, so
I see some
yes,
responses in already.
the number of our participants today has selected the option C, which is the Labor Act Cap 1 L1, Law of the Federation of Nigeria 2004. Bukumi, do you agree with what the audience has picked?
I mean, the answer is clear, and I think the audience, we do have a very learned audience clearly. The Labor Act is the primary legislation, and I guess when you also look at that question, it does show that there are other legislations that do impact employment relationships, but for this particular question, the Labor Act is clearly the primary legislation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bukumi. Yeah, one very important thing that you mentioned is that there are other legislations also that play a role in employment relationships in Nigeria. However, I believe that would have throw more insight into that as we go into the conversation. Okay. On the scoreboard, we have a number of participants. Okay. So we have early leads, and we hope that it's looking like it's going to be a very interesting fight between the audience today in terms of responding to the questions.
I think it speaks to Kachi, it speaks to the speed at which they answer. So I see one of our participants, Amira, who is in the lead. Let's see how that goes by the end of the polls.
Let's see whether she can maintain the lead up to the end. Okay, that's a good one. So we go to the next question we have here is, before an expatriate employee can lawfully commence employment in Nigeria, which of the following is typically required? I'll take that again. Before an expatriate employee can lawfully commence employment in Nigeria, which of the following is typically required? As the first option here, we have a residency certificate issued by the local government. The next option is expatriate quota approval and appropriate immigration and work authorization. The third option we have is approval from the Nigerian Labour Union. And the fourth option is a tax clearance certificate issued by the State Internal Revenue Service. So please pick your answers. Let's see what's happening with that.
Okay.
Okay, this is we have a number of the audience picking the second option, which is the expatriate quota approval and appropriate immigration so work authorization. Bukumi, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I do, and I really love the fact that we see the audience participating. I would love to have more people. I think that we have over 100 people, so I want to just encourage members of the audience to continue to participate in the polls. Yes, expatriate quota approval, which is issued by the Ministry of Interior, is the critical requirement for you to be able to lawfully commence long-term employment in Nigeria. So thank you so much, our audience. Okay, I see some comments about some people having challenges to vote, but our technical team will address that quickly. But you just use the link and see how you can log in and then vote. But yes, that's why quota very, very important to be able to work in Nigeria for long term.
Thank you so much for me. You can so we go back to the scoreboard and we can see Amira is still in the lead. So we hope that she can keep that up. But it's good because we have
no, somebody else has picked it up, Kachi. Check it out. It just changed.
Oh wow.
Just picked up
That's very
yes.
good. That's very good. It shows that we have
Just by 1 point.
very, very informed audience today, and that's a really, really good one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll move to the. We hope that Ortega and Amira can keep it up, and we have other participants or audience members also to join the quiz, the poll. So the third question is: what is the primary policy of Nigeria's expatriate employment framework? What is the primary policy objective of Nigeria's expatriate employment framework? A, we are to increase payroll tax collections. B, to reserve a management position exclusively for expatriates. C, to address skill gaps and facilitate the transfer of knowledge and expertise to Nigerians. And D, to eliminate the need for expatriate employees. The first option is to increase payroll tax collection. Second is to reserve management positions exclusively for expatriates. C is to address skill gaps and facilitate the transfer of knowledge and expertise to Nigeria. And D, to eliminate need for expatriate employees. Wow, everybody in the audience has gone for the answer C. While I believe this,
there are two people, Kachi. There are two people that picked the first two. I mean, one person for each of the first two options.
Yeah, I can see that. So majority has picked that. Okay, of course. So yes, thankfully that's a good thing because like we said, the purpose of this chat is to provide clarifications where areas that agree. So I believe that the participants that have picked the other two options, going by the comments that you're going to present to us in the next couple of seconds, they would understand better. So please, what do you have to say about the option that the audience has picked in general?
Yes, I mean, the audience has made my work easy. The expatriate quota framework, or expatriate employment framework, was designed to really address certain skill gaps that were existing in Nigeria. And the idea of ensuring that we have individuals who have the expertise to come into Nigeria and transmit that knowledge to Nigerians who can then take up those roles subsequently. So option C is clearly the right one. I see somebody also typing C into the chat box, just to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bukumi, for that clarification. So for the members of the audience that picks the other two options, I hope that the given the correct answer would, probably would surely help you understand that better. But I believe that we'll go deeper into that conversation as we move on in the session today. So the fourth question we have here is, under the current tax framework, an individual's tax residency status may be determined by considering 1, the nationality alone, 2, the employee's salary level, 3, physical presence only, the 183-day rule, and 4, a combination of factors including permanent home, center of vital interest, habitual abode, and economic connections. So which is the answer going by the audience?
See some responses. Okay, some people are typing in their responses. Maybe they're having some challenges voting, but it's fine. Can work with that. Yeah. Kachi?
Okay, yeah, I can see now. Majority of the audience have gone for D, which is a combination of factors, including permanent home, center of vital interests, habitual abode, and economic connections. Yeah, I believe that this is also the correct answer. However, I also know that you may have some comments around that. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, and I just want to mention that yes, the individuals who chose C picked that because that is also one of the factors. But the answer that more or less aggregates the key points, talking about the permanent place of our board, economic ties, and then even the number of days could still play a part. But when you look at the question, option D answers that more appropriately.
Thank you very much. Yeah, another reason why the audience may have gone for the 183-day rule, because it was one of the 3 joint rules that were necessary for the old tax law, which is the personal income tax.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
important to note that we've moved away from that personal income tax into the Nigerian Tax Act, and we will have further conversations on that as we go ahead. So the last question starts with in your opinion. So I believe that, oh, sorry, before that, we need to go to the scoreboard and
Our
see.
leaderboard is up, yes.
Yeah, so as it stands, Amira has gone back to the lead, so she's doing very well. Thank you, Amira, for participating, and we'll encourage, especially for these last questions, we'll encourage other members of the audience, audience members to participate here, because there's really no correct answer here. We just want to have a feel and get your opinion on the question we're going to ask. So the last question is, which workforce trend is likely to have the greatest impact on employers over the next 5 years? So A, we have growth in remote and hybrid work. B, tax and payroll digitalization. C, increased expatriate regulation. And D, AI and workforce automation. Like I said, there's really no correct answer here. So we just want to, get a feel of what's
So the question, Kachi.
the most likely. I can hear you, Bukumi. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the question, Kachi, how do we determine the winner? But maybe the fastest response. So let's see how that goes.
Yeah. So a number of people have gone for the first option, and a number of them have gone for the last option also. Okay, so I'll just let you Bukumi take that and just take us through that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, growth in remote and hybrid work, very, very critical element. Although a lot of organizations are looking at bringing people back to the office fully, but it's clear that a recurring feature of the workforce of the present and even of the future is the fact that there will be remote work, either whether people working remotely for organizations that are not even in Nigeria, or people who are working in Nigeria, they have days they go to work and they have days they work remotely. The point around tax and payroll digitalization is so critical because from both ends, the regulators are investing significant funds in digitalization technology. And so it's important also that organizations are able to respond at the same pace or even faster so that they are not playing catch up. The third point around increased SY regulation is very focused on SY employment and the recent reforms around the visas, around the SY quota really speaks to that. So that point is also very, very valid. The final point around AI and workforce automation is so critical. There's this argument around whether AI will take the work of people, and then the general consensus that I've heard and the conversations I've heard is the fact that AI will take the work of people who don't embrace AI. So AI is meant to be an enabler. So it's important that people understand that the workforce of the now and even of the future is such that you cannot say no to AI and then workforce automation, because all of these are meant to create efficiency and to create a situation where organizations are able to increase profitability while ensuring that other things that they have to do are done efficiently. Thank you so much, our audience, and thank you very much, Kachi.
Thank you so much, Bukumi. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the position of AI in how the world works in the next couple of years can not be overemphasized, because that's exactly why KPMG has this and as the forefront of one of the the pillars that we are pushing forward, because it's absolutely important to embrace it. And I like the quote that you just mentioned. You mentioned now that people that don't embrace AI will most likely lose their job to AI, and that's a very, very key word. Thank you for that one, and I'll keep it in the records for myself. So thank you, and so we go back to the leaderboard, and Amira has led it from the start. Oh, well done, Amira. Amira, well done, well done. But
Congratulations, Amira.
Yes. So the poll, and it's has essentially just set the tone of the conversations we're going to be having, and at least it's helped us to understand that our audience are quite knowledgeable about the discussion we'll be having. So we can then move right into the conversation. But first, let's actually see what the whole conversation means for employees and employers in practice. So to begin with, Bukumi, could you highlight some of the key laws and regulations that currently govern employment matters in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you so much, Kachi. And my work is easier now because we've covered some of those points. Obviously, the primary legislation that we have talked about, the primary is the Labor Act. And then you have, when you look at the taxes, then you talk about Nigerian Tax Act 2025 and the Nigerian Tax Salvation Act 2025. The aspect of pension, where money is set aside to provide for the future of employees or help them to be able to have something in store for them to use in future after retirement. It's the Pension Reform Act 2014. The Employee Compensation Act 2010 seeks to provide a framework for supporting employees when they have injury, disability during the course of work. And then the Business Facilitation Act is also one to talk about because it did change the phase of employee-employment relationship in terms of certain aspects that employees could take advantage of. For example, the National Housing Fund contribution. When that act was passed, the Business Facilitation Act was passed, it made it optional for employees in the private sector to contribute to the National Housing Fund. And then when you look at expatriate employment, the Immigration Act 2015 and Immigration Regulations 2017 are critical regulations that guide what happens with respect to expatriate employment in Nigeria. These are just some of the other things, other legislations that we could talk about. But let me just pause on that note and just say that these laws are there to govern employment, payroll, tax mobility, and workforce compliance in Nigeria. Thank you so much, Kechi.
Thank you, Bukumi, for that response. And like you rightly said, you had mentioned just a couple of them, but it's important to note that there are several other legislation and laws and acts that actually play a role in how employment is looked at in Nigeria. And then with so many regulations, like we mentioned, you just mentioned but a few, but with so many regulations and circulars and other legal documents that that provide the legal basis for taxation and of employment income in Nigeria, it's important for employees and employers alike, to keep abreast and be up to date all the time to ensure that compliance is not lost, because they will say ignorance of the law is not
an excuse.
So that also okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, Kachi, I mean, that point really just brings home a very valid matter that happened recently. Part of what the Nigerian Tax Act and Nigerian Taxation Act has done is really to shed a bit more light on certain aspects. For many years, many employees within the payee framework did not used to file their tax returns, which is usually for generally people think it's for high net worth individuals, the one doing March, which is what we call Form A. But when you look at the Nigerian Tax Salvation Act, you'll see that it's clearly expected. In fact, there's a penalty in Section 101 where if you do not file your tax returns as and when due as an individual by 31st of March, you are liable to pay the penalty of 100,000 naira for the first default and 50,000 naira for every subsequent month of default. And I remember sharing in a group, and people were shocked that they thought that they didn't have to actually file their personal income tax returns, which will consolidate all income sources, both from payee, the employment income, they could have rental income, interest income, and make sure that they actually file that and deduct the appropriate taxes and pay it to the government. So I think this is very, very important to note. Thank you so much, Kachi.
Yeah, thank you, Bukumi. And yeah, like you rightly said, it's really, really important considering that some revenue tax authorities have linked the issuance of tax clearance certificates to employees or individuals filing their Form A returns. So very, very important for employers and employees to take note of that. The onus of filing the return actually lies with the employee for the return in March, like the Form A that we're talking
Yes.
about. However, we know that you know the companies assist their employees to do that. So in that sense, both the employee and the employer should look into that and see how they could make sure that they remain compliant all through the conversation.
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
so which takes us to our next question, Bukumi. So given that the Nigerian Labour Act is widely regarded as the cornerstone of employment regulations in Nigeria, it will be helpful to understand the scope of this application. Do you get? And are there categories of employees that it applies to, and are there exceptions? So please give us your comments on that.
Okay, I mean it's good to point that out, that the Labour Act is not all encompassing, but in answering your question, what I will say is that when you look at the Labour Act, there's a primary focus on the category of individuals working called workers, and then there's also a category for non-workers. So what the Labour Act tries to do is to distinguish workers from non-workers, and workers typically are those in manual or clerical work, and then non-workers are people typically in managerial positions, executive positions, people like you and I, Kachi. But I guess then begs the question, so you're not working, Kachi, so I'm not a worker. But I mean, I guess just around technicalities of the term, but just try to distinguish between workers and non-workers. And for the non-workers, what determines how they are managed mostly is really the terms of their contract, and then common law principles also do apply, and then all the legislations that we've talked about, the Pension Act, or the ECS and all the other legislations. But primarily, the Labour Act seeks to protect people who are in the category of workers.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Bukumi. So, like you said, it's important to note that workers in this context relates to how the Nigerian Labour Act has defined the term workers. But for non-workers, actually, like you rightly said, um, non-workers are generally employment relationships within them are generally decided by their employment contracts and common law principles rather than the Labour Act itself. So thank you for that response, Bukumi. Then we can move on to the next question. But before we discuss compliance rules and obligation, when does the need for expatriate recruitment typically arise? And what immigration and legal requirements must employees fulfill before admitting expatriates into Nigerian employment?
Okay, thank you very much, Kachi. I think we talked about some of that in the polls, the SY quota system, which was designed by the Nigerian government to facilitate knowledge transfer. And the requirement to bring in expatriates is typically driven by the need to have foreigners with expertise that is scarce in Nigeria, that may not even be available, to come in and train Nigerians. However, it's important to also note that there may be instances where expatriates are required in Nigeria to safeguard the business interests of the owners. You have people who bring in foreign direct investments, and they may need to have people on ground who are the directors, who are key stakeholders to actually run the business. In fact, within the oil and gas industry, you have what is called 5% investor interest, which is typically given, in giving approvals for employment of expatriates, for them to be able to bring in those expatriates, to be able to run the business. Now, part of the requirements that then align with bringing expatriates is the fact that they should be under studies. The requirement is that you should have at least 2 Nigerians understudying an expatriate, so that the Nigerians can learn and gain the expertise that the expatriate has to offer. And then after a period of time, usually expected to be within the lifespan of that quota. Quota is usually valid for 7 years. Usually within the lifespan of that quota, the employee in Nigeria, the Nigerian employee, can then take over the role of the expatriate. Generally, the objective is really local capacity development and enabling Nigerians to be able to gain certain skills and expertise that may not be available readily in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bukumi. And just to to add to what you rightly said, a couple of people may make the mistake or error of thinking only around the immigration perspective when they look to bring in expatriates, without also considering that there are several other compliance obligations that are required in terms of tax and other obligations to before you bring in expatriates. So employers really do well to have a holistic view of the compliance obligations that they have,
Yeah.
before they go ahead to employ or bring in expatriates into the country. Thank you for that response, Bukumi. We can move on
Thank you,
to
Coach.
the next question. Yeah, you had mentioned that the Nigerian immigration framework is designed to ensure that expatriates are engaged primarily to address, knowledge gaps and basically transfer knowledge to local employees in that sense. So, how do the immigration policies strike a balance, between attracting foreign talents and ensuring that local employment opportunities still remain?
Okay, I mean, very good question. And I think it's something that many people, employ expatriates, kind of battle with to say, okay, we we have people who want to invest in Nigeria, and then there's also the requirement for Nigerians to be trained. I think the balance is really understanding that it's a give and take thing. When expatriates come into Nigeria, that Nigeria is able to benefit from their expertise, and then local capacity is developed. There's also that provision, like I said, in the oil and gas industry that seeks to protect the investors' interests. So I believe some of these measures are aimed to create that balance, making sure that there's access to expertise and then local workforce is being developed. Obviously, the tracking mechanism for the government is the understudy arrangement, where regularly there may be reviews to evaluate whether Nigerians are actually taking up certain roles, and then the requirement to Nigerianize certain roles will also come in. Quota is not given forever. Many quota positions. There may be certain categories that may be put on what they call permanent until reviewed, usually senior management positions. But typically, when a quota lifespan expires, the expectation is that the Nigerian should have been trained enough to be able to take up that role. So I believe that's how to find that balance. Bring in expertise and then also train local expertise or develop local expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bukumi. And yeah, like you rightly said, yeah, it's important that that whole scenario is planned such that expatriates can also transfer knowledge. And in the past, you'll find that expatriates that were supposed to, for a position for that was supposed to be like a 2-3 year period for the knowledge to be fully transferred to the local employee. You find expatriates staying much more than that, in the past, and it felt like the government was not doing enough to ensure that knowledge is transferred properly and all that. But you find that there's been an increased scrutiny in that on that end, both from the Ministry of Interior and the Nigerian Immigration Service. There's so much scrutiny on that front now. So employers should really ensure that when they are bringing expatriates, everything is clear and documentation are done properly to ensure that everything goes as it should be go and they remain fully compliant. We will come back to some of these conversations here that we've had so far, but let's just go back and take our attention to for instance local employees. I'm sorry, for now, local employees. What are the key employment and tax statutory obligations that employers must comply with when engaging and remunerating employees in Nigeria?
Yes, I mean, you use the word key, and the primary one that's I believe everybody in the room is aware of is payment of taxes. You have got to pay your taxes. And so the PE system, PE stands for pay as you earn, which was designed to make the employer an agent of government to actually calculate, deduct, and remit taxes to government. So that's a critical one that the employers need to be aware of. And it's important that you don't just deduct the taxes, you remit the taxes. I remember many years ago, maybe a few years ago, not within KPMG, but I overheard a conversation with someone who mentioned that they found out that their employer had been deducting their taxes but had not been remitting. and they wanted to know whether to blow the whistle on the employer. And the question was, how do they handle that? So, but it's important that employers also know that the tax authorities have a right to audit your records and determine whether you have been remitting the taxes that are due to government. And if you have not been remitting the taxes, an assessment can be issued, and you will be liable to payment of not just the taxes, but also penalties and interest that may accrue. The second very important point is the pension requirement, which applies mainly to local employees. For expatriates, it is optional, it is not obligatory. But within the Nigerian space, we have the pension requirements where employers are required to contribute 10% and the employees can contribute 8%. Now, if the employer decides to contribute everything, the employer contributes 20% and sets that aside for the employee. And then they want to run safety to provide a framework for treating the employees, or provide a framework for making sure that if there is any disability, if there's any impairment, physical impairment in the office while in the course of work, the employer can be taken care of. That's the Employee Compensation Scheme, which is regulated by the Nigerian Social Insurance Trust Fund. And so it's expected that monthly 1% of the income is set aside and paid to the NSITF. So that's the easiest requirement. This one covers both the Nigerian employees and expatriates. So there's no discrepancy. And then there's no separation, beg your pardon. And then the requirement, which may not be legislative in nature, but the requirement that I want to mention is the importance of record keeping and reporting. Record keeping is so critical. I remember a situation where an employer had an audit and they didn't have the proper records to show that an employee had actually left. And that meant that they had to be assessed on additional taxes and back taxes on an employee that was no longer in their employment, and the burden of proof that the employee had left then rested upon them. It made it a lot difficult. Finally, I think the reporting requirements, which is also supported by law, the requirement is that employers are meant to file a return of income and in the previous year of their employees and file it by 31st of January of the subsequent year. So the returns for this year, for example, will be due in January 2027. So it's a requirement backed by law. So please, employers who are in the room, make sure that you file your returns. There are forms that are used for that. It's Form H1 and then Form G, and make sure you submit it to the relevant tax authority within the space where the employee resides. I think it may be good, Akachi, at this point to even talk about the basis of taxation, which is residence, because there are many people that work in Lagos but live in Ogun State, and they need to know, the employers need to know that the taxes for those kind of employees need to be paid to Ogun State if they live in Ogun State, not where they work, because when there's an audit, that can become an issue. So please, employers, check your records, regularly engage with your employees to determine whether their locations have changed. Make sure that the appropriate taxes are remitted to the relevant tax authority where they live. Thank you so much, Kechi.
Thank you, Bukumi. Yeah, you've spoken extensively on this. So, but I just wanted to, I remember when you spoke about deduction and remittance of tax.
Yeah.
We've had a case where an ex-employee actually, had already left the organization, but realized, upon joining the new organization and applying for tax clearance certificates, he now found that it was only the current year that he had worked in the new employer. And with the new employer, sorry, that he had records for, and after doing all even checks, he now found out that the old company wasn't paying his tax, even though they were deducting. So it brought out a big issue because several ex-employees also now started coming back to ask for the same thing. So they all sued en masse. They sued the organization, and it became a very, very big issue for them. So aside from deducting of taxes, remitting at the right possible and the right time, which is before the 10th day of the subsequent month. So in that sense, if pay is deducted this month of August, before the 10th of September, it should have been remitted to the relevant tax authority. So it's very, very important, paramount that employers know this and keep to it for compliance reasons. So thank you for that response, Bukumi. We can move on to the next question. So, we had mentioned compliance obligation relating to local employees, right? So, but are there exemptions for expatriates? Do expatriates have a specific or a special way their tax is being looked at from the law perspective in Nigeria?
Okay, so thanks, Kachi. I mean, if you're an expatriate, you're living and working in Nigeria, you will be taxed based on the income you're earning in Nigeria, at least at the minimum. So from a tax standpoint, I mean, they're not exempt from paying taxes. Obviously, the taxes need to be calculated properly, and then the right taxes need to be deducted and remitted. But like I mentioned earlier, there are not perhaps, there are two areas that I would like to focus on in my response. For pension, it is not mandatory for expatriates to contribute to the Nigerian pension scheme. But if they want to, or the employer wants to, they could do that, but it's not an obligatory requirement, but it's obligatory for Nigerians. Like I said, ECS, Employee Compensation Scheme, deductions and contributions are mandatory, although this is deducted by the employer. It's really an employer cost and doesn't typically constitute an element in the employee's compensation. And then the expatriates need to also make sure that they are up to date in terms of their own documentation. An expatriate will need the right permit, will need the right visa, make sure that their permits are valid as and when required. So they need to pay attention to that. A Nigerian employee would not require a permit, a permit to work in Nigeria, as long as they still hold the Nigerian nationality. Thank you, Kachi.
Thank you so much. On that front also, we've had questions around whether the expatriate remuneration should form part of, the computation for the Industrial Training Fund, ITF, and the Employees Compensation Scheme. We had mentioned the Employee Compensation Scheme, but I just wanted to bring it to fore that also for the ITF, it's paramount that expatriate remuneration in an organization are considered, and 1% is deducted at the end of every year to make payments for ITF. Thank you, Bukumi, for that response. We can then move on to the next question we have here. So in practice, we often have employers ask whether expatriate employees in Nigeria are completely exempt from all statutory social related contributions and deductions, just like rightly meant about ITF. So so the question to you is, are expatriates exempt from being added to that base to compute for social security related contributions in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think I've answered that question, but maybe you just wanted me to shed a bit more light on it. Yes, expatriate for pension, it's not mandatory, but I like that you also added the ITF. But technically, Nigeria's social security system is not like, for example, the US social security system. So you have several elements that make up the quote unquote the social security obligations in Nigeria. But I think we have covered very clearly the ones that apply and the ones that do not apply to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bukumi. Now, so we've discussed local and expatriate employees. However, like we already mentioned, there's an interest in for remote workers and freelancers and people, generally working hybrid, and particularly these individuals that work, that they don't have a steady work pattern in that sense, or the traditional work pattern in Nigeria. So how are such arrangements viewed from an employment tax and immigration perspective?
Okay, so if you look at it from the Nigerian standpoint, because you have a lot of, it's called the gig economy now, where many people have multiple income sources. They may even have, in addition to employment income, they do other things at night, oftentimes working with employers who are overseas, who don't even have physical presence in Nigeria. And you may also have instances where people they don't even have employment relationship with any Nigerian entity. I want to say clearly that people need to understand that the fact that you're doing remote work for a company that is not in Nigeria doesn't mean that your income is not liable to Nigerian taxes. Especially with the increased scrutiny, technology being put in place now. For many years, many people may be under the radar, where they're earning a lot of income, and Nigerian government has no idea about what is going on. But that is a lot more scrutiny is being put in that area, and people would not be able to easily get away with that like they used to. And so it's important to really evaluate. And in looking at that, certain conditions need to be looked at. If someone is in Nigeria and working for a company that is overseas, you need to evaluate where the income is being derived from and where the work is being carried out. And I guess the answer is probably easier to look at, like, they are carrying the work from Nigeria. The income is derived from Nigeria, where they're carrying out the work from. Now, you then look at the permanent abode. Where is their permanent abode? Were they in Nigeria just for a short period, or Nigeria, their permanent abode? Where do they have economic ties? And then, like, do they have economic ties to Nigeria? Where's their center of vital interest? And then perhaps one other point to look at clearly is the treaty provisions that may be available for them. For example, it's possible that that income that they earn may also have been subject to taxes in the jurisdiction of the employer that they work for overseas. So they may be able to take advantage of treaty provisions so that they are not subject to double taxes. But in evaluating that, one needs to look at each case on the merits of the case, and then look at it closely to determine which portion of income, if income is going to be subject to taxes, and which portion of that income will be subject to Nigerian taxes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bukumi. Yeah, so maybe in a quick summary of what you just said, essentially, so flexible housing arrangements and flexible work arrangements, hybrid work arrangements, remote work arrangements does not automatically exempt you from paying Nigerian taxes, as they are non-negotiable compliance and obligations and responsibilities for employers. So, employers and individuals that are having this new work arrangement should do well to ensure that they are kept abreast with the most current trend, and they know exactly how to navigate the whole process of paying their taxes to avoid penalties and other additional issues that may arise from that front. So thank you, Bukumi. So we had also spoke. Sorry, I thought you said okay. Sorry.
Please. I was just confirming that I had.
Thank you very much. So earlier in the conversation, you had spoken about how there had been reforms over the last couple of years, especially in Nigeria. So the question to you now is how have these reforms changed the current landscape of employment in Nigeria?
Okay, reforms. Remember last year, there was a lot of noise around reforms. What's going on? And it's interesting that the areas that we're focusing on today, which there's an intersect between tax and immigration. They have both undergone reforms recent times. The immigration reforms have happened with the digitization that's been brought in, a lot of changes, even the visa policy has been revised, and then the tax reforms that have also happened. And maybe let me focus a bit on the tax aspect in answering your question for a start. One major change that has happened is the removal of what we call the consolidated relief allowance. And the consolidated relief allowance is an allowance that was introduced or meant to help to reduce the tax burden on the employees. And what happened with the passage of the Nigerian Tax Act is that a rent relief allowance was introduced to replace the consolidated relief allowance. And then another thing that is very important to mention is the introduction of new bands. And the introduction of a particular band that is zero-rated tax band, where annual income from 0 to 800,000 naira is subject to 0% taxes. So that's another change that happened. In the past, we didn't have any part of the tax band subject to 0% taxes. So the annual income from 0 to 800,000 subject to 0% taxes. Now, the impact of these changes definitely do vary depending on the income level of the various employees in Nigeria. And it's something to really look at. So individuals need to look at their specific circumstances. Obviously, the rent relief allowance is one that may have generated a bit of interest with some people wondering how do they take advantage of this. And I want to mention that it's not automatic that it can be claimed. You have to make sure that you have the proper documentation, the agreement with the landlord, the receipts, so that can serve as a basis for the claim when there is an audit. So just some changes that have happened, but I think perhaps one of the most critical ones is the removal of the CRA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bukumi. Yeah, and that's very, very correct, because prior to now, the CRA was just a blanket relief for every Nigerian employer, as long as you're in, employee, as long as you're in employment situation in Nigeria, you had access to that relief, on the rates and the basis on which it was computed. But the recent reform has moved that bracket relief to more specific and specified, which is one of them is rent, and considering the other ones that still have available as pension, the National Housing Fund, and all that. So the move essentially has moved from a general relief system to a more specific and targeted relief systems. Thank you for your response on that front. We can then move on to the next question. So, looking at the implementation of the reforms so far, how have they affected employment tax obligations, and what should employers and employees be paying attention to under this regime?
I think it may be helpful to also kind of dimension some of the reliefs that people could benefit from, even as we talk about what they could be paying attention to. You talked a bit on it, so maybe we could just double down on it a bit. Talking about the rent relief allowance, which can be used to reduce taxable income. And the rent relief, it may be helpful to mention that it is the lower of 20% of the annual rent or 500,000 naira. Because I've seen instances where some people would just saw 500,000 in the law and just speak 500,000 naira. And they thought, and just give everybody a blanket 500,000 naira. No, that's not how it works. You need to check the numbers. So it's the lower of 20% of annual rent or 500,000 naira. But the cap is obviously 500,000 naira. Pension continues to be a tax deductible item, and then voluntary pension, subject to a particular threshold, is also a provision that people could take advantage of if they do contribute to both. So they make additional contributions to pension, then they can take advantage of that. Now, an individual's contribution under the National Health Insurance Scheme can also be claimed. And obviously, the final one I would like to mention is the 0% tax rate for the first 800,000 naira of income earned by an employer or employee. And then just now double down to go to your question around things that employers need to really pay attention to, is that employers need to pay attention to the importance of governance, putting in place appropriate governance within the organization, making sure that there's proper protocols for documentation, proper protocols for recording the transactions that happen between them and their employees, proper contracting also. You don't just engage employees without clear terms of reference, and then knowing who is responsible for what. Now, technology is another point that employers need to really pay attention to. Like I said, the regulators are investing significantly in technology. We are all aware of what's going on with the Rev 360. There's e-invoicing going on. There's a lot more tracking going on, online filing going on. So employers also need to make sure that they are ahead of the game. At least they are at par at the least with the regulators. Now, there's another point that I think is important to mention, which is effective collaboration. Gone are the days where workforce management only lay with HR. And you find that in certain instances where you have organizations where certain aspects of workforce management maybe addressed, maybe in finance, when finance pays the salaries, maybe there's somebody else who does immigration, maybe HR does recruitment. And if there's no handshake between all those three different areas, then there may be exposure. And I give you a quick example, Kachi. Imagine, so an employee is engaged, and the employee has a contract term, maybe a contract term of 5 years, based on the terms of engagement. And the person who knew that who knew about the contract terms, who had the record, maybe it was somebody in HR, and the HR keeps it, looks at it, this employee will be in our system for 5 years. However, after 2 years, the employee decides to leave. Now, if that information is not passed along to the person in HR, it's possible that it's his line manager that will have that information, or somebody in finance who will stop paying salaries to the employees. If salaries may not be paid from HR, it could be paid from finance, paid from another unit. And they don't communicate that development to the person who is handling the immigration aspect. Then the firm, the organization, runs the risk of continuing to carry the responsibility for the employees, or bear the responsibility for the employees from an immigration standpoint, even from a tax standpoint. because they will not do what is called deletion, to remove the details of the employee from their records and obtain what is called a deletion slip. This particular point is so critical, very, very vital, because without the deletion slips, it makes it difficult for you to argue your case that that employee is no longer in your employment, especially for expatriate employees. So it's so important that there's that handshake. If you don't have a centralized system, then make sure that there's a system of communication so that everybody knows what is going on. And finally, there has to be a checklist system also, so that when an expatriate is leaving, they know the things that they need to do. Maybe they need to submit their residence permit if you will need that to delete them. Just make sure that there's constant communication across board. My final point really is that workforce compliance requires coordination, proactive planning, and proper communication across all the parties involved. Thank you very much, Kechi.
Thank you so much, Bukumi. And I will just also stay on the importance of documentation, right, like you rightly mentioned. But this time on the flip side, over the last some years ago, we had an organization that got a letter, as in the person at the gates got a letter from the tax authority, and it was an assessment, a demand notice, of course, an assessment, but he failed to pass the letter to the appropriate people, persons in the organization that were going to, take that up. And when it became an issue and the argument was going back and forth that we never received the letter, from the company, they now went to the register at the gates and traced it and found that the security guy actually received that letter, and the organization actually had to pay a portion of the assessed liability, even though they had an objection to it, even though they were willing to object to it, but they had to pay a portion first, I think 20% or thereabout, before they could go ahead. So that just goes to say that documentation is absolutely important, and enlightening everyone in the organization down to the people at the gates, or the regular workers, is very, very important, so that they know that any form of letter or anything that comes to them in that sense should be adequately passed to the right persons that will take it up from that angle. So thank you so much, Bukumi, for that response. We can then move to the next. So we had initially we spoke just a little bit about, or you mentioned it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kachi. I think we
okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kachi.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I think there was a slight. Yeah, I can hear you now. I think there was a slight network interruption. Part of what we experience at times with technology. So I wanted to mention that we could take one more question, and then before we go on our break, and then we'll come back to take questions from our audience. I see the chat box has been bleeping, and I just want to remind our audience, like Kachi said earlier, that they should put the questions in the question tab. Don't put your question in the chat box so that we don't miss the questions. Put them in the question tab. It can be easier for us to access. So we can just take one more question, Kachi, and before we go on a break.
Thank you so much, Bukumi, for that. So yes, and we can then. So this question is actually very important. So it's good it's coming now. So, in a sense, initially you had spoken about tax residency, but just a bit, right? So but how does the approach that existed previously? How does it differ from the current approach in determining a person's residency in Nigeria? And what are the common things to look at, from the perspective of the employer?
Okay, from the perspective of the employer, I think our conversation really for today has doubled down a lot on that particular point. The employer is responsible for making sure that they have proper documentation, the proper handshake, and then the point around the conditions that are looked at in determining tax residency have also been broadened within the new tax framework, where economic ties, where personal ties, permanent home place, center of vital interest are looked at, and not just people generically looking at, have you spent 1 night, 3 days in Nigeria? So it's important. I think my closing point is that it's important for employees and employers alike to be familiar with the provisions of the tax laws. And for immigration, for those who have expertise, also be familiar with provisions of immigration laws and regulations, so that they don't run afoul of the law, and they are not penalized because of their ignorance. Thank you very much, Ketchen.
Thank you so much, Bukumi, for your responses, and thank you, for joining us today to provide valuable insights, and practical guidance for the conversation. So, as for now, we'll go on a quick break, and when we return, we'll, be taking some of the questions from the audience and see how we can respond to these questions and provide clarifications to the questions. So, thank you very much. Thank you also to the audience for being with us to this point.
Thank you, Kate.
Today's tax landscape is rapidly evolving. You need to stay ahead or risk being left behind. As the world moves faster and budgets and resources get tighter, how do you scale up your business while keeping costs down? How can you leverage technology to create more value for your organization? How do you stay on top of the latest technology trends? Welcome to KPMG Digital Gateway, a single cloud-based platform solution where technology meets tax. Designed to make it easier than ever to access all your data and do your work in one place. Digital Gateway provides you access to the complete suite of KPMG tax technologies and a global network of KPMG tax professionals. Powered by Microsoft Azure and with KPMG's ambitious investments in AI, KPMG Digital Gateway won't just streamline the way you gather, manipulate, and review data. It can supercharge it, processing and transforming your data into actionable insights. Generating value from Digital Gateway is straightforward thanks to its intuitive interface and modular design, all built with connectivity in mind. Today's tax landscape is rapidly evolving. You need to stay ahead or risk being left behind. As the world moves faster and budgets and resources get tighter, how do you scale up your business while keeping costs down? How can you leverage technology to create more value for your organization? How do you stay on top of the latest technology trends? Welcome to KPMG Digital Gateway, a single cloud-based platform solution where technology meets tax. Designed to make it easier than ever to access all your data and do your work in one place. Digital Gateway provides you access to the complete suite of KPMG tax technologies and a global network of KPMG tax professionals. Powered by Microsoft Azure and with KPMG's ambitious investments in AI, KPMG Digital Gateway won't just streamline the way you gather, manipulate, and review data. It can supercharge it, processing and transforming your data into actionable insights. Generating value from Digital Gateway is straightforward thanks to its intuitive interface and modular design, all built with connectivity in mind.
Good morning once again and welcome back to the session. So we'll just take some questions from the audience now as we go around the conversation towards the end. But just to as a reminder, please put the questions in the chat in the question and answer tab rather than the chat box so that the questions don't get missing in the conversations and we can adequately provide clarifications on that note. So some of the questions are coming in now. Oh, so we can then just go ahead. So we'll start with the first question. Bukumi, somebody's asking that under the new residency rule, are short-term business travelers to Nigeria now treated as tax residents and taxed on their worldwide income?
Okay, thank you very much, Kachi. This is a very good question because when you look at the concept of short-term travelers, short-term business travelers, if you double down on it from an immigration standpoint, someone may look at it and say people are coming for business meetings, but you could also look at the concept of business travelers. People are going to conduct business, quote and unquote. But the answer to that question is they are not automatically subject to taxes on their worldwide income. Their short visit do not automatically create tax residency. The specific circumstances of their visits, of their trips need to be looked at closely. And then the determination need to be made on what exactly they are traveling to do. If the basis for their trip is work, it could be short-term work, then the income earned during that short-term work could then be liable to taxes in Nigeria. So the answer to that question is we will need to look at the case and evaluate carefully the specific context of the trips.
Okay, thank you so much, Bukumi. And on that front, also, it's absolutely important for this same individuals to ensure that they pick the right visa type. When looking
Yeah.
at bring expatriates into the country or coming for business, because some visas automatically make you taxable or tax resident in Nigeria. So that's
Mm-hmm.
also a
Mm-hmm.
very, very important point to note. Um, okay, yeah. Somebody wants to know how do the new tax rules impact benefits like housing, cars, and relocation packages for employees? How do
Oh,
the
yeah. I
new
mean,
tax rules
yeah.
impact benefits like housing, cars, and relocation packages for employees?
The employees. Thanks, Kachi. Obviously, for the housing, for the allowances in that sense, the benefits, the value of the housing is still subject to taxes. For in terms of vehicles, if the vehicle still belongs to the company, then the treatment is such that you look at 5% of the value of the vehicle, and then you charge that to taxes annually. Typically, in practice, you find people do that. They may do that for about 4 years, but then about 5% of the vehicle. But if the vehicle it belongs to the employee and it's no longer a property of the employer, then the full value of that vehicle is actually added as part of the compensation of the employee and then subject to taxes. And the relocation benefits also need to be clearly looked at to determine which portions will be subject to taxes under the NTA. But what is important is that don't just assume, don't have a blanket assumption that oh, this is not subject or this is subject. Make sure that you consult carefully and evaluate the particular case so that you can determine the appropriate taxes to remit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bukumi. And just to add a little bit to that, it's a common misconception
Okay.
that relocation packages are generally not taxed, and this could be it could come out very, very wrongly. As for relocation to be really considered a relocation, they have to be an actual relocation. That's the individual has to leave its current place to the next place, and there also have to be proof that the relocation is for business purposes and not for a personal reason. So, like you
Yeah.
rightly mentioned, several conditions that should be looked at. So, for the tax rules, it's important for individuals, and in response to the person asking this question, it's important for employers and employees to ensure that they look at the individual rules for each of these kinds of benefits, as they are not essentially the same in all cases. Look at it carefully, and also keep, like you rightly said earlier, keep proper documentation and make sure that everything is right before you then go ahead to make some of these items maybe non-taxable or put in the portions of it that are taxable. So thank you very much for coming for that response. We have another question that came in. So how can smaller businesses without dedicated tax or immigration teams realistically stay compliant in this new environment?
I mean, the fact that you're a small business does not mean that you can't keep records. At least the basic records can be kept by small businesses. So make sure you have your books kept, the income that you're earning, the expenditure that you're making, and then at the minimum also make sure you're registered for tax purposes, because at times some of the challenges that small businesses have when it has to do with dealing with taxes is that they are not registered. The proper registration is not done. So please make sure you are registered and at intervals, because many people who run small businesses could say they can afford fees for a consultant, and all of that. At intervals, you could bring in expertise knowledge to help you review your books and evaluate that you are doing the right thing. Proactivity is very key. It's always better to be proactive, conduct health checks, know exactly where you are, so that if there are gaps in your system or in your processes or in your records, you can mitigate those gaps before an audit is conducted. Because if you're trying to do that during the course of an audit, then you might find that you have to pay penalties and interest. And I remember a story that I heard about. In fact, someone reached out to me recently. She had some transaction with a particular organization, and this is not even within the border of personal income tax. Now we're even talking about other transaction taxes, and she did not charge the VAT that she should have charged. on that particular transaction, and the organization did not pay her the VAT. Now, an audit is currently ongoing, and she's been asked to be responsible for the VAT that should have been charged. And she's a small business owner. She came to us, she came to me in person and asked me how she could do that. There was no way around it, because it's either she gets that particular organization to pay the VAT to her and then she can remit, or she pays it out of pocket. And that's one of the challenges that small businesses have to deal with. So be knowledgeable about the requirements that you need to comply with, have proper records, and then have professionals coming to do periodic reviews. I think that will help a great deal.
Thank you so much, Bukumi, for that response. I believe that you've actually done justice to that. So the audience member that asked the question, I hope that you've gotten enough clarification. And in any case, you can engage afterwards and see whether you require additional clarifications on. So the next question we have here from the audience is, the person says, by the year 2027, all employees and individuals in business will file their annual tax returns all by themselves to the relevant tax authority in the respective states of residence. Kindly give us a breakdown of how the employee and individuals in business can do this filing, considering individual expenses in this.
Okay, can you go back to the question again? I missed the first part.
Okay, so essentially, so that I don't read everything all over again, the person is just basically asking that by next year, individuals need to file their returns, and I believe he's talking about the Form A. So the person is just trying to know that the person is saying, give them a breakdown of that whole process. How do they get information? How do they file the returns? And essentially, what's to do for that process? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, the process is not complicated, especially for Lagos State, especially. Lagos State has made it automated. An individual, you're supposed to have your own tax ID. So you log into your portal, the tax portal for the Lagos Internal Revenue Service. And different states' Internal Revenue Service do have their portals or their system of filing. Then what you do is that you report stored income from all sources. Now, if you are an employee, what you will find if your employer had filed your returns in January is that you will see the records of the returns filed on your portal. You will see the employment income that has been reported for you on your portal. Now, if you then have additional income sources, you have rental income, maybe you have interest income, you have other income sources from investment income also, then you're supposed to note all of that on the portal and add that to the analysis of your income. Now, if you had not previously remitted the taxes on that, you will see a calculation. You'll see the taxes that are supposed to be due. If the taxes are not due, or if you don't have, let me say, if you don't have any additional income source, maybe just your employment income, you should not have any additional taxes due if your employer did the right thing. But if you have other income sources, please report them in filing your returns. And when you submit, after you submit, if there's an assessment that you are supposed to still make a payment, the tax authority will review your submission, and if you're supposed to have an assessment after your submission, they will let you know and send you an assessment on the additional taxes that you need to pay. But for those in just employment, maybe employment relationship payee, and if the right taxes have been paid for them and they make their submission, they should be able to even download their tax client certificate right away if they have filed returns for at least 3 years. So the process is not difficult. Get all the information that you need, income sources, receipts. For those who are on pension, who are in employment, they will have a pension statement. They need to put that on the records. If you claim rental relief, you're supposed to also upload the evidence of the claim of the rental relief on the portal, so that all the reliefs that you claimed, there's evidence to support the reliefs that you claimed. So that when they say there's a review by the tax authorities, they do not assess you to additional taxes. I hope we address your question, Salma, whoever asked that question.
Thank you. The person can respond in the chat box. Thank you very much for the response, Bukumi. So, as a next question that we have here in the chat and in the question and answer box, is it under the new residency rules, are short-term business travelers to Nigeria now treated as tax residents and taxed on their worldwide income?
Okay, I thought I already addressed that question. So we might want to take another question. I addressed that question earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I guess the questions that are coming up are pretty much the same. It's just worded differently, but it's still around the same conversation. So I'm
Or we
just
could
looking.
let's check the chat box in case we have people who drop questions in the chat box and have not used the question tab. So maybe let's just take a look at the chat box then. We might see some questions there. Let's check the chat box. I see the chat box has been. Yes, I see a number of questions here. I see, does students have to pay tax? I heard there were exceptions for students, but I'm unsure if there are grade lines to it. To state the scenario, I got a freelance job that lasted 2 months as a student. Am I exempted? No, sir, you are not exempted. So I guess the question that happened, or the discussion around students paying taxes, maybe taxes on the, what do they call it? What's the word now? The stipends that are given to them by their parents or by their whoever is maybe sponsoring their education or giving them from funds. If you have a stipend as a student, that is not income. That is not income from employment. But the scenario you painted about a freelance job, you are actually working and you earn income from that work. So you are meant to pay taxes on that income that you earned. Mr. Favor, or it could be a lady, Favor Taiwo. Oh, sorry, I think my video was off. I was having some network glitches. Apologies for that. So, Favor Taiwo, I hope we'll address your question. We've addressed your question. So please go pay the taxes. Okay. I hope you can hear me. You can see me now. I think I had some network issues and my video went off. Okay. So, Favor Taiwo, I hope we have addressed your question.
She can just put a response in the chat box also. So the next question we have here is regarding the new tax system. When was it put in place, and does it only have to deal with people who are in the labor market or every citizen generally?
Okay, the new tax laws. I mean, if you earn income, you are under the tax net. Tax is on income. The idea of taxation is on income. We're not going to tax. You're not going to pay taxes if you are not earning income, which is why I talked about the student who gets a stipend. You don't need to remit any taxes on your stipend. Your stipend is for personal use. But if you earn any income, as long as it's within the threshold, it's beyond the 0% threshold. So if your minimum wage earners, for example, are not subject to taxes on the minimum wage that they earn. But if you're not the minimum wage earner and your income is above that threshold, then you should pay taxes on the income that you earn. Kachi, let's go back to the chat box. I want to just check. There's a question from Ores Onyema. He says, what is your advice on a situation where an individual does voluntary pension contribution and his employer refuses to recognize it? Wow, how can that be taken in when filing individual payee returns? Now, we need to really understand the circumstances there, because I believe that if the person is in employment and sent a notification that additional pension should be deducted, additional contribution deducted from his salary before it even gets the net salary, then the question is, why is the employer not remitting it? So you may want to have a conversation. I may not be able to give you an answer here, but what I would say is that you may want to have a conversation with your employer to understand why your employer has not been remitting. And you can't just individually decide to take that as a deduction in filing your individual returns. Like I said, in filing your individual returns, your employment income returns would also show on your portal to show what has been filed on your behalf. So you can't unilaterally decide that you want to claim the relief if that has not been recognized already on the records of the employer, because your employer is responsible for deducting the additional voluntary contribution and then paying it to the pension fund administrator, or except the circumstances are different. We may want to have a conversation outside of this meeting or this session to see how we can guide you further on this. The student have paid tax. We have addressed that one. I'm trying to just see at what point. Let me just say the next question.
Can someone?
There's a question.
Yeah,
there's a question, Kachi. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so the question we have here from Timothy Alao, he says, can someone wait until the tax filing period to declare and pay taxes on earnings from remote jobs without incurring penalties for not declaring or paying earlier?
Okay, so I mean, if the person, I think this scenario looks like a personal income tax situation. So where the person is not in employment, where there's a pay-as-you-earn system that means that every month the employer can deduct and within 10 days remit to the government. So the person can aggregate all their income, run the calculations, and then pay to the government their returns. So yes, if that is a context that the person is trying to paint, they can aggregate their income, run the calculations, because even in filing the annual returns by the employer, there's what is called the consolidation of all the income across the months, and then evaluating that there is no additional liability. There are times when after you do the consolidation, you see that variances here and there, and you can still pay the variance before filing. So yes, you can aggregate all your income that you from your freelance job, and then run the tax calculation, and then pay the taxes due, and then you file your returns. Remember, you pay the taxes due before you then file your returns.
Okay, thank you very much, Bukumi. So just to add to that, it's not in every case where you have a remote job that or let's say you have the employer predominantly based outside of Nigeria. It's not in all cases that you're even exempt from tax in that sense. You know, there's something called a fixed base. There's something called significant economic presence. There's also permanent establishment. So there are several other aspects to look at, you know, in based on this question before you can then determine, right? But in general, you earning income, the onus lies on you to ensure that it's declared on time. And based on the law, you're supposed to make that payment before the 10th day of the next year. So the payment is one perspective and filing the return is another perspective. Now, for filing the return, of course, the returns are done once every year. So that's in that sense, it's understandable that you want to wait to file the returns. But in terms of payments of the applicable taxes on the earnings or the remuneration, that's another discussion entirely. However, there's also a place where individuals can approach at the beginning of that engagement with the foreign company or with the base of the company. You can approach the tax authority and have a discussion. Now, this is by no means a certainty that they will grant you that concession, but you can reach out to them, write to them, and ask questions like that. That's okay. This is this situation. Provide the context and let them know what you want to do. You may get that kind of clearance to do that, and then you can proceed with that. But it's absolutely important that you engage them. But aside from that, and based on tax law generally, you should pay your taxes before 10 days of the next month in which you earn the remuneration. I hope that provides you some clarification.
Let me just add, Kachi, because we did talk about small businesses earlier, although we're not really focusing on, we're not talking about their corporate tax requirements. We're just talking generally about documentation in relation to the employees that they may have. And I think it's important to talk about the fact that a business is defined as a small business if its total turnover is less than 100 million. And so that's what the new tax laws have defined small business as. So people need to understand, how do I say my business is a small business? Do I just say, oh, because I don't think I'm earning a lot of income? So the turnover threshold is 100 million. If it's below that, then you are a small business. But you are still required to pay income taxes on the the income earned by your employees. So it doesn't exempt you from still paying income taxes on the income earned by your employees. I hope that is clear. There's a question here. I think there is a CWES student. It says, do I pay tax as a CWES internship student? Now, the question that you will need to then ask is, how much income do I earn? Remember that we talked about the fact that if your income is within the 0 to 800% band annual income, then you are charged at 0% taxes. And 0% means no taxes. So you need to look at that, how much. I don't know how much you're paid, so you need to check that and determine whether that particular amount is very unlikely that you will be within the tax rate, but I do not want to assume. but you need to check how much you're earning to determine whether taxes will be paid on the income that you're earning.
Just to add to
Amos,
that also,
yeah, go on,
person needs to check.
Kachi.
The individual needs to check around the national minimum wage, right? Because that also exempts you from certain things. So if you're aside from although the 800 thousand naira and the 0% or effectively covers the minimum wage earners, right? But that's also one perspective to look at. And I'm only mentioning that because you mentioned the CWES program. So Bukumi, you wanted to go ahead to the next question, please.
Yes, I wanted us to just go on. I think most people have been using the chat group, but if we have any question, the question tab, we can still go back there. I see Amos Ganya he wrote that, how will you recommend reliefs that rent, interest on mortgage, and life insurance be treated in this circumstance? For some organizations, waiting to get the source documents from employees to compute the taxes may not be feasible. Is it okay for a tax company to exclude this relief? The employees can then claim them during their annual filing when they are now recomputing the taxes. I mean, I think the main point, and I would, Kaji, you are free to also share your points here, is that it's the earlier you get the documents, the better, in terms of the documents that you want to claim relief on. And you remember that the expectation is that taxes are supposed to be remitted every month. However, if before the question then really is, what payment are you making? Except you want to look at it to say the tax payment that would have been due for December, which will be filed, which will be paid in January. Just before that tax payment is paid, you want to check whether the person has relief that they can use to offset the taxes that they would have paid for December. And then they pay it net of those reliefs before then the taxes are paid and then the returns are filed. So the timing also is very critical, because if you also don't pay your taxes as and when due, then penalties and interest may accrue. If taxes for December are not paid by 10th day of January, they might create issues. So, but the earlier the better. It shouldn't take a 12-month period to get documentation to be able to claim a relief. It's perhaps the documentation is not available, and that may then mean that the person is not able to claim that relief. Amos Gaya, I hope that helps address that. But what I would recommend to employees is that if you don't have documentation, don't assume and go and take a relief if you don't have documentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Bukumi. That was just what I was going to say, that it's absolutely important that you have the documentation prior to claiming the relief. It's absolutely important because that's essentially the basis for you. Because aside from having the documentation, also the dates on the documentation or on the documents, dates has a direct link to the dates you are allowed to start claiming the relief. Some reliefs are paid on a preceding basis. So in that sense, there's no excuse why you shouldn't have it. While some reliefs you can claim it as it goes, but there needs to be that documentation to be able to validate your claim for that relief. So it's absolutely important to that. Okay, Bukumi, you can go ahead. You wanted
very
to
valid point.
speak on the next
Thank you. So Favor Taiwo mentioned that you have addressed the question. As a follow-up, I tried to file my tax, and the only usable link I could use was LIS portal. I tried all logical means to register, but I kept claiming I have an account. All means to use the forgot password option kept leading to a dead end. Is the LIS where I will file my tax? If you're resident in Lagos, the answer to the question is yes. If you're resident in Lagos, you're supposed to file in Lagos for your personal income taxes. I think this person has some admin issues. So the way it is, you may need to engage directly with the LRS support team to resolve this. And you may also send us an email subsequently. We see how we can be able to guide you. But it does look like there's some issues at the back end with respect to your profile. Yes, but the question you asked about where you file your tax, if you're a resident in Lagos, the jurisdiction or the tax authority that has oversight over that jurisdiction is the Lagos Internal Revenue Service. So you should file returns because there's no national portal or link for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for me. So Tega Okome has a question here. It's, at what point do you advise implementation of rent relief? Monthly alongside payroll cycle or during annual filing?
I mean, for our clients, we typically will prorate across the month because rent is annual, and so what you do is you take the relief. We typically prorate on a month-to-month basis. So yeah, so that's what we typically do.
Yeah, okay. So just to add to that, so it's also very important that you note that the portion of the rent that is claimable by the employee is only the portion that relates to the
Yeah.
relevant year in question.
Yes, exactly.
So what I mean by that is you find that some rent payments can span between 2 years, maybe a month in this year and span
Mm-hmm.
into a month in the other year. Now you're
Yeah,
not allowed
that's
to
correct.
claim not allowed to claim the portion of the rent relief that doesn't relate to the tax year in question. So that's also very, very
Mm-hmm.
important. So in that sense, people that do the payroll and payroll, yeah, should essentially the HR should always make sure that they monitor, that timeline so that you don't continue to add the relief even after the measure or the time that it should be granted as elapsed. So that's also a very, very important point to note. But just to add also, because payroll is also done monthly, and this is the reason why Bukumi had mentioned that we do it monthly. Once you provide us the documents and we confirm that the document is accurate and confirm the figures and the amount. It's first of all, it's important to know that it's not the total amount paid that is claimable. That's the first thing. But when we get that and we've confirmed the documentation, we then do the computation of the portion that can be claimed, and then we then spread it over the 12 months period or over the period that is valid to be claimable for that employee. So these are things to be noted. But I also wanted to bring this that the filing is kind of like a different process from paying of taxes, right? So um, paying of taxes comes with like the remuneration, the deduction, and the payment. Filing is just a way for the government to check that you have computed correctly, you've paid correctly, and you've done all. Basically, you are fully compliant. So that's why it's done. So so you cannot essentially wait till you want to file the returns before you then make payments for almost any kind of payment that you want to make. Maybe except you then have a conversation with the relevant tax authority and they accent to that. But generally, payment, deduction and payment is very, very separate from annual filing. I just thought to mention that. So
Okay, thank you very much, Kachi. Hello, Kachi, can you hear me, please?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hello, Kachi, can you hear me?
I
Okay,
can hear
so I
you.
think we have a few other questions. Yeah, we have a few other questions in the chat box. I'm also checking the question tab, but let me take one from Joy Okoro. It says, can you confirm how the current income tax law can impact this rise on temporary work permit in Nigeria? I mean, during the period of the employment in Nigeria, the question that we need to then ask is what's the income, the portion of the income that they are earning in Nigeria may need to then be subject to taxes for Nigerian taxes. So people on temporary work permit will typically may be paid, not limited, typically may be paid income for the work that they're carrying out in Nigeria. So that portion of the income that they earn for that period would need to be evaluated, and then the appropriate tax treatment taken, or like I said, there may be other considerations to look at if there's a treaty provision that they may take advantage of because they may still be residents of other countries from which they came from. So let me look at another question here. It says, okay, I'm trying to check now. Okay, I think we have answered this one. Do students have to pay taxes? We have answered
Okay,
that
so
one.
there's one from Israel Isuri here. It
Okay.
says also, when is expenses considered in this computation? Is it when you work as a freelancer or as an employee whose pay is deducted? I want to believe that this is a follow-up question from one of the questions, but it's not so clear. Now, just as a random response to it, the first thing is what kind of expenses are you talking about? So what do the expenses relate to? We need to be clear whether it's business related expenses or personal expenses. And in that sense, when you say expenses being considered for what? So maybe you can help put those clarifications in the chat box, and we'll circle back to it, and then we'll be able to provide you a more educated response in that sense. So Bukom,
Okay, thank you very much, Kachi. Yes, yes. I'm just trying to look through the chat box so that we can take as many questions as possible. Apologies if we do not get your questions. There are quite a number here. We just want to make sure that we address as many as possible. I see one more. Okay, let me just see this one now. It says, okay, I think you have answered this one from Israel. There's one more question here, Kachi. It says, in response to my question, this is Israel. Say, are we using the total gross salary for the computation, then claim the pay paid on the employer? I'm trying to understand what the person is trying to. Kachi, did you get that?
So I get I got what you said now, but it's not so clear. But if the question is around on what base do you compute pay, then obviously yes, it's the gross salary, and the gross salary in this case includes both the fixed cash aspect, or let's say the cash aspect, and the benefits in kind also that can be attributable to that employee. So your total gross salary is an addition of the fixed portion of your remuneration and the benefits in kind portion, or the benefits that are not cash related portion. That makes the total gross pay. And it's, if your question is around payee computation, yes, the total gross pay is the basis for computing payee computation.
Okay, that's fine. There's a question from Fridays Ojewale. It says, regarding the new tax system, when was it put in place? And does it only have to deal with people who are in the labor market or every citizen generally? I mean, there were 4 enabling legislations, but I know the 2 primary ones that maybe we are concerned about is the Nigerian Tax Act and the Nigerian Tax Administration Act. The Nigerian Tax Act took effect in January this year, and it is it is really to guide, to provide a framework for taxes to be administered in Nigeria. And it says, is it for everybody in the labor market or every citizen? Anybody earning income, you fall within the tax net, and you then evaluate the impact, the degree to which you will need to comply. So yes, everybody earning income. And I mean, just to add also, just for knowledge purposes, that yes, the scope of this discussion has been personal income taxes, but the tax laws cover all other taxes, corporate income taxes, you have transaction taxes, VAT withholding tax, and what the tax what the intention behind the Nigerian Tax Act is to bring a body of knowledge where all the tax laws are consolidated into one critical document, 4 documents covering various areas. But then Nigerian Tax Act then more or less consolidates the various tax laws. In the past, you had the Corporate Income Tax Act, you have the Personal Income Tax Act as a separate body of law, but now you have all those provisions in one particular document. So that is what has been done. Fridays Oyewole. I don't know
So
if I
Bukumi, yeah,
pronounce your name.
sorry, I wanted to jump in. Yeah, you had mentioned for knowledge purposes, and as you were speaking, something also dropped in my mind. We've been hearing returns, and I'm thinking that it's it's important that we distinguish both the kind of returns that we're talking about, and in terms of pay as you earn taxes now. So there are 2 separate returns for pay as you earn taxes, right? One is for the employer. It's basically an employer's return. The employer should basically file a return of all the emoluments he had paid to its employees in the immediate preceding year, right? Or the immediate preceding year. However, the return that we're talking about that relates to the individual, which Bukumi had mentioned in the earlier conversation around Form A, the onus for that is on the employee. Like I said earlier, though we find situations where the employers help to do that, but the onus is on the employee. And in that return, it carries all elements of income that employee has earned. So for distinguishment's sakes, the return in January is for the employer, and it relates to only employment income, right? But the return to be filed in March, which is the Form A, which is the Form A, actually relates to income, um, all income, including employment income, including personal and businesses, including unearned income, like maybe if you're receiving pension and all that. So the return in Form A essentially has the totality of all the income you've earned for that year, right? Whether it has been deducted as such or not, you have to file that return. What the tax authority is looking at is they want to see the total income that you have earned for the whole of that year. So it's on that basis that the return is being filed. So I just thought to make that distinction in that regard. Thank you. Bukumi, do you have any other questions?
Thank you very much, Kachi. I think Mr. Sunday put a question in the chat box, but I think we've already kind of addressed that, sir, when I was talking about the question from Joy about income, how the Income Tax Act can impact the on temporary work permit. The Nigerian Tax Act does not specifically mention the word temporary work permit, but the focus will definitely be on earning income in Nigeria, income earned in Nigeria. And then the determination will be whether that income is subject to taxes in Nigeria. So the question that we then need to evaluate is that, is the person earning income in Nigeria, and do they meet the criteria for tax remittance? And if they do, then the taxes should be remitted to the tax authorities. Mr. Sunday, I hope that addresses your question. Mr. Sunday Olabode. Okay, I see a question now. What if I have a resident? This is a very interesting question, Kachi. From it says, can you try to pick it out? I just missed it. It says, what if I have residents in both Lagos and Ogun State? I'm trying to get the question out again. Saw it and then it just popped off.
I'm also trying to look for it.
It says, what if I have residents in both Lagos and Ogun State?
Okay, what if I have residents in both? Okay, you send it. Go ahead then.
What if I have residents in both Lagos and Ogun State, but I work in Lagos? Where will I remittance be done? I mean, you have to determine your primary place of residence. You obviously can't be in two places at the same time. So in determining where exactly you reside, we need to determine how long you spend in each of those states. Where do you have your permanent place of abode? Because at times people may have a temporary place. Maybe you may have a permanent home in a particular location, Ogun State, and maybe because you run shifts, so you go to Lagos and then you can sleep over in a particular place, a temporary place of sleeping over, but you still return to your primary place of residence. So that primary place of residence, which is called a permanent abode, will be deemed to be your tax residence. And that's where your remittance should be done. But we can take a look at that subsequently and evaluate further. Thank you. There's another question around. Yeah, go on.
Yes, I also just wanted to mention that we have to start rounding up. But I think there's a question here. Interestingly, it's about immigration. I think we can just have that and have you provide your response to that, and we can look at other aspects of the session today. So,
okay.
What are the main immigration routes available for foreign nationals who want to work in Nigeria?
What are the main immigration routes for foreign nationals who work in Nigeria? There are two basic options for them to consider. There's the option of the temporary work permit, it's which can be obtained as an electronic temporary work permit. And then there's the option of the what is called the e-SEPAC. SEPAC stands for Combined Necessary Residence Permit, and it used to be called the alien card, but it's now the automated card. So the idea is that if it's short-term work, usually a period of 3 months, the person can come in on the temporary work permit. Currently, the ETWP is not extendable, and so it's important to really look at that very carefully. You do your 90 days and then you leave Nigeria. However, if an expatriate is needed for a longer time and they will need to live and work in Nigeria, even bring their family members into Nigeria, get children into school, then they need to go with the SEPAC option. However, for the SEPAC option, they need what is called the expatriate quota, because without the quota, you can't put an expatriate on the SEPAC. So the expatriate quota, which we talked extensively about much earlier in the conversation, must be obtained by the company, and the quota will indicate the position that will be occupied by the expatriate and the validity of that particular position. So in trying to engage an expatriate, one of the first things you need to consider is how long will they be in Nigeria, what's the nature of the assignment, and the duration also of the assignment, which I talked about, and then decide the appropriate platform to utilize. There are instances when companies may utilize the temporary work permit option as a stopgap. For example, they may want to bring in an expatriate on a long term, but they don't have the appropriate quota for that particular position. So they could get the expatriate in on a temporary work permit. It starts the work, and then they start the process of obtaining the quota, which we do for many of our clients. And then after the quota is obtained, the expatriate goes out of Nigeria and then comes in on the e-SEPAC and then can continue to work in Nigeria. Does that address your question? Whoever did ask that question. There's another one in the chat box. While we wait for feedback, Kachi, I know we are getting close to the end of the session, but there's a question here from Mr. Sunday Olabode. It says, sorry, I just want to know if the expert. Okay. I mean, I think I've answered that. You need to look at the basis. If you have income in Nigeria, there's a likelihood that it will be subject to income taxes. If the income is derived from Nigeria, but we need to then look at all the other factors that need to be in place before determining whether that income will not be subject to taxes in Nigeria. So, Mr. Sunday, is that are you final with the response?
Okay, so Mr. Sunday, while you could just please help us put your comments and your response to Bukumi's question in the chat box. I guess we could just take Bukumi, you had also touched on this, but it should be a quick response. We can take that and then start to round up the conversation. So, can an expatriate enter Nigeria on business visa to perform work? That's the question.
The answer is simple. But I guess it may be good to also or explain that at times the question of what is work is a slippery slope for many organizations. And at times they say, the person is just coming for meetings, When the person starts taking the position where they are administering knowledge, oftentimes you start going on the borders of work when they are transmitting knowledge, when they are facilitating certain projects, when they are engaging and transacting on behalf of a particular organization, then you need to be very, very careful with that. But if they're coming in, for example, there may be non-executive directors who are not resident in Nigeria. They want to come in, have meetings with the team, get feedback on how the business is performing. They may be able to use a business visa. What I will also say is that one of the most abused, perhaps one of the most abused visas is the business visa, because people just think, oh, you're making a business trip, get on a business visa. Because over time in the past, it used to be easier to get a business visa. But it's important that you're very, very careful in how you use that. Evaluate carefully. If someone is coming to facilitate a training program, that is work. If someone is coming to sit in a training program, that would not be work. Maybe they're coming to attend a training program, that would not be work. But they are coming to facilitate and actually administer that knowledge, that would be work. They are coming on a rig, obviously. They're coming for installation, that is clearly work. Please don't put expertise on business visas for that. But if you do need clarity on what you should do based on the nature of the assignment, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can provide proper advisory on the visas that you should consider and the appropriate processes that you need to follow. But general rule of thumb, before you say it's a business visa, go get a business visa, take a step back and take another look at the nature of the assignment in Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bukumi, for that response. And we hope that we've done justice to most of the questions that have been asked. Yeah, because of time and because of the nature of the questions, we couldn't, before you give advice, you have to have all the facts and have everything correctly in place before you can actually give advice. So some of the questions were provided blanket answers because we needed more information to be able to, give you an appropriate response to that. So you may look at engaging further after this session, and we can see whether we can, come to an agreement or a place where, we can provide additional clarity to whatever questions you may have. Thank you very much, everyone that has joined the meeting so far today, the session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kachi.
So, Bukumi, would like to have
my closing comments. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We're trying to wrap up, but I just saw a question that I think the context is quite clear, and we can just quickly address it so that person doesn't have to send us a mail. The person said is the base of ITF payment different from that of NSITF. Kindly explain for that. I mean, I guess the person knows that there is this 1% that applies to both. But generally 1% for NSITF payment is typically 1% of the basic housing and transport. And then what you'll find for the ITF payment will be annual payroll. So it includes every single element within the payroll. So that's what you would look at in calculating your ITF remittance. But for NSITF, typically one-off payments do not typically fall within the purview of that. And then you will also find that that is typically limited to basic housing and transport. Mr. Ishaka Idris, we hope we have addressed that particular question.
So just add just a little bit to what you've said. So yeah, the distinction is like you rightly said, the one of aside from the one of exemption of one of payments from the ECS computation, though there's still conversations with NECA and
there's an argument here and there, yeah, I know
around that. So that's
definitely.
fine. But one important distinction is that for ITF, it has to do with the staff cost. So everything that it costs company to maintain every staff in that or the organization, sorry, to maintain every staff in that organization will be put. So there are some payments or some let's say payments that may not necessarily run through the payroll, right? But it relates to the staff and is the costs the organization or the employer is incurring on behalf of the staff.
Yeah.
In that sense, that's those portions also would also constitute parts of the base for computing ITF. That's why we usually ask for financial statements rather than payroll reports or payroll information. We have a financial statement that has all the information around what it costs the company to maintain the employees. So it's on that basis. Either financial statement we're not available, then we ask for maybe trial balance that would lead to the financial statement or management account or things around there where we can see payments that may not have run through the payroll, but they relate to employee costs. So I just thought to make that distinction very clear. So thank you very much once again. And
there's a comment here, actually. There's a comment before we go, so that your response is not seen in isolation. So I'm Mr. Olalekan. I will say, but ITF Act states payroll costs. Do you want to shed light on that? I have an idea, but I'd like you to double down on that since you started talking about it. So there's a comment to your response. There's a comment to your response that but ITF Act states payroll costs. You had mentioned that.
And so in that sense, you have to know, like we've rightly said, when you look at, so the definition of payroll on one act may not necessarily be the definition of payroll on another act. That's why we always say you have to take everything as what the law or the act or the legislation says. And that's why in determining what it says, you have to go to the points in the act where they clearly explain all those terminologies, because it's actually very, very determinant. And aside from that, we're also talking from experience of having done this ITF situation over the years, right? So one other aspect that's been argued over a while was director's cost, whether non-executive director's cost should be added or not. That is not clear in the act itself, right? But in the ITF from, I think 5A or something, it's there.
Yeah, 5A.
Right.
From 5A.
So you then have those conversations and you see, and when they provide clarity, you see. So like I said again, some conversations are not just direct, or some responses are not just direct. There are other things around it that will then make you make that decision. Aside from that, there are also case laws that you can then use to argue. The case laws may not necessarily give you the full back end, but it gives you a position to be able to argue your position, a point to be able to argue your position. So yes, in terms of ITF mentioning payroll costs, it's actually the cost to the company in terms of how it was defined in the act. So I hope that clarifies.
Thank you so much, Kachi. I think that really helps. I mean, just to say that there's an email address in the chat box, and we would like the conversation to continue, and we hope to have further discussions on some of the issues that have been discussed, and even other areas that may be of interest to our audience, and we definitely will be happy to take it forward. So back to you, Kachi.
Thank you, Wukumi, but we are coming back to you for your closing remarks, actually. So
okay then. So I mean, what a day we've had. It's been very insightful, from talking about the purview of the Labor Act, how its focus is primarily on workers, that's clerical staff, and it doesn't cover executives like you and Kachi and myself, where our own employment is really guided by the contract terms and common law, to talking about expatriate matters, expatriate employment, to talking about reliefs, the changes that have happened, with the consolidated relief allowance being removed, to talking about collaboration that is needed across various aspects of the businesses, where you need to ensure that there's proper integration, and then talking about the importance of having proper governance in place to make sure that you're on the right side of the law. I think one critical thing that has stood out for me during this session is the fact that compliance is something that you must not take for granted. And I hope that the conversation we've had today has helped to reinforce the importance of compliance to our audience and everyone who has joined from various parts of the world. And they will definitely make sure that they're on the right side of compliance. As a firm, KPMG is a champion of that. And please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to have conversations on how we can support you in making sure that you're on the right side of the law. Thank you so much again for joining us. Now back to you, Kachi.
So thank you, Bukumi. You've essentially given my own closing remarks, as you've touched on all the topics here. So I would just say thank you so much to you for availing yourself and providing so much insights in the conversations that we are having. We'll also thank the audience for taking out their time to join this and participating very, very actively, I might say. So a big thanks to you, and we hope that we've been able to do justice to at least some of the questions here, and then we are of course available as a firm to talk further and discuss further on any other additional questions you may have. Thanks also to the KPMG team and everybody that's been part of this session so far. On behalf of the team, I would say thank you for the time and participation so far. We wish you a wonderful rest of your week ahead. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Today's tax landscape is rapidly evolving. You need to stay ahead or risk being left behind. As the world moves faster and budgets and resources get tighter, how do you scale up your business while keeping costs down? How can you leverage technology to create more value for your organization? How do you stay on top of the latest technology trends? Welcome to KPMG Digital Gateway, a single cloud-based platform solution where technology meets tax. Designed to make it easier than ever to access all your data and do your work in one place. Digital Gateway provides you access to the complete suite of KPMG tax technologies and a global network of KPMG tax professionals. Powered by Microsoft Azure and with KPMG's ambitious investments in AI, KPMG Digital Gateway won't just streamline the way you gather, manipulate, and review data. It can supercharge it, processing and transforming your data into actionable insights. Generating value from Digital Gateway is straightforward thanks to its intuitive interface and modular design, all built with connectivity in mind. Today's tax landscape is rapidly evolving. You need to stay ahead or risk being left behind. As the world moves faster and budgets and resources get tighter, how do you scale up your business while keeping costs down? How can you leverage technology to create more value for your organization? How do you stay on top of the latest technology trends? Welcome to KPMG Digital Gateway, a single cloud-based platform solution where technology meets tax. Designed to make it easier than ever to access all your data